All right, so this is my new to me, but 70, 80-year-old mill that I got after realizing that on a lathe, all you can do is cut cylindrical things. So I cut a couple things on this, went okay until I found this thing here is called a vise. And I'm not very, I still kind of don't know what I'm doing with milling machines, but I do know it's not supposed to do that. Pretty sure this vise is not supposed to slide like that. So I decided to take it apart and take a look inside and try and figure out what's going on. All right, so a couple things. So I decided to take it apart. There's two Allen keys that are going to come off here. This obviously just slides off. In here is an Acme thread, which looks pretty worn, which is probably my problem. There's a collar here, which is going to be important in a few minutes once I get this open, because the other end of this does not stick out. I'll show you in a moment. All right, so you can see here the not much of that Acme screw sticks out, which again, in my forensics of how to build this thing is interesting, because I guess the original pictures of this and some pictures of similar vices, they do have some sort of collar out there. So I have to remove these two screws here to get the jaws off, and we'll see a little surprise in there. All right, so I've got those two screws out, jaw comes off, and way in there is a collar, which I thought was interesting. So that collar and this collar, which is machined in it, is what keeps everything in place. However, I've seen on pretty much every other picture of this vise, this model, I've seen a collar out here and a collar on the outside. I guess they do the same thing, but it's curious. And I'm going to see if I can loosen this collar. Oh, actually, I got to take this apart, I guess, first. Usually what I've seen, at least in the an old catalog, was a jam nut, two nuts jammed against each other on the outside. That certainly would make it easier to adjust up there. So I'm thinking this is stripped, and that maybe this wasn't original. You'll see when you take a look at that collar. And somebody decided to put a collar inside and inside as opposed to outside. I don't know if that really matters, but I'm going to take this part off and then we'll take a closer look. All right, so I removed these two screws. This comes off, and then this whole thing comes out, and you can see it's kind of looks kind of homemade, because it's sitting on these Acme screws, screw, and it's got two set screws kind of just jammed in there. I mean, maybe this is how it came, I don't know, but certainly not easily adjustable without having to take the vise apart to get to it. Also, you'll notice that it's a reverse, this whole thing is a reverse thread, so you actually, what would normally be a screwing in motion actually unscrews it. Also, not supposed to do that. So I'm going to loosen those guys, take that off, and see, take a little more investigation. All right, so I've loosened this collar. I can slide this off now. That over there, and then slide this whole thing off. And one thing I noticed when I took this apart the previous time, so like I said, it slides around there, but as I get, let's see, because it's backwards, I have to remember which way I want to go on this. Go the right way. I want to go this way. So I could run a caliper on here and see if things aren't lining up, but I also find it interesting that as I get closer to this end of the thread, which would be in the clamped position, it does not want to slide, which suggests that this is really worn here, but not worn there. Okay, so this is it all stripped out, but so this is actually going to be my first attempt at actually making a useful part on the lathe. This is vise on the mill with the stripped ACME thread. I've taken it apart, and seems like at least the way this was working before this became stripped is there was a collar here, and then there was a another collar that had little set screws that would sit here, and so the jaw would move back and forth, and either this collar or that collar would be what pushes against the frame of the vise to move the jaw back and forth. However, in most of the pictures I have seen of other vices of this model, there's a collar on the outside and then like jam nuts or some other collar on the other outside part there. So, which is what I think I'm going to duplicate, because trying to get to the set screw means we're removing the jaws. It seems like a lot of work. So I'm basically going to duplicate this, except for that I'm not going to have a collar there. I'm going to have it out here, which means that the whole shaft will have to be however thicker that collar is, or however thick I want the collar to be. And then also, right now, not much is sticking out, so I'm not going to use a true jam nut. I'm just going to use just two regular nuts. And if I remember correctly, looking up at the McMaster car, they're just under ½ an inch each, so I probably need a full inch coming out of here. I don't think that'll have any clearance issues because I'm not going to remove the swivel base, but anyway, so it'll come out to here. So I'm going to make it roughly an inch plus whatever I deem necessary for a solid collar. I'll probably copy that thickness. And I'm going to machine the collar in. This is all one continuous piece of metal, so I'll probably 3/4 inch piece of metal and cut it down, and then cut these reverse ACME threads, which will be the first time I've ever done that. And then the final bit will be cutting this, which I assume I will be doing on this brand newly acquired mill that I barely know how to use to cut these 4 corners. And provided I do it okay, I'll have a working vise again. All right, here I'm using a very scientific method of drawing with a pencil onto the blank, and then I'm going to use this gauge to figure out the angle I need to grind it to. So just using that mark there, and then just hold it up against the grinder and just keep checking your work, and eventually it'll be ground to the angle, hopefully the angle you want. All right, so trying to hold all this together. That looks pretty good, and I'm trying to do 8 threads per inch. A little bit of rattle in there. Go to 8. That seems pretty good. So we'll try that. Hope for the best. Okay, so we want to do 8 threads per inch, which if you look on this chart, there's 8, and it says the top lever could be in the left, center, or right, but 8 says right. That's the lever here, so I want to go all the way over that way. The other thing is the sliding gear needs to be in. I took off the cover so we can see what we're doing here. That's this gear. Needs to be in, so that's in. And then the last thing is the tumbler has to be in the row for the 8. So it's way over here right now. I gotta move it all the way over. 8 8 is the last hole there, so switch hands. There, so I'm in that tumbler. I'm in this gear is to the right, and the sliding gear in the back is in. So that's all I need to do to 8 threads per inch. All right, so I've already, I can't do it now because it's in the tool holder, but I've already ground that to that distance. Now I'm making sure that the tool post is square to the work, which, even though the compound is at a 14.5 degree angle, the actual tool post has to be square to the work. So using this gauge, and it appears that it is. All right, so I just tighten that down, which I did already, and that means I'm ready to thread, I think. All right, this might be the final cut. This might be the final cut, I think. I'll cut it a little longer because I think I might cut off the end. All right, I think I've done it. Ended up cutting this a little less deep than I apparently the specs would require, but that's maybe because that internal one's worn a little bit. Not really sure, but doesn't matter as long as it works. Okay, so I'm going to try a second pass here, making a new thread. Just want to show the differences between the first time I did it and the second time. So now I have this collet block, which is the same on all 4 sides. Also, I'm going to cut the square notch first rather than the last thing I did. Last time I cut the thread first, which meant that I had to use this contraption, because it's all I had, for holding the thread, and of course the other than the part I was cutting for the square handle bit on the end, the widest part was the thread, so I had to grab it by the threads with this thing, which was fairly far back, so that a fair amount was sticking out, which meant I then had to use this guy to support the tail, and as you can see, to cut all 4 notches so that this has a certain height. Then you turn it on the side, and now the height of the shaft was different. And then, of course, when you go like this, then the height of the shaft was different again. So basically, out of the 4 sides, I had 3 different shaft heights, which meant also I had to adjust this for 3 different heights. It was a pain. And I lost my concentric measurements and just was trying to survive. Here, so I've zeroed this out to the top of this. I will cut to the depth I need, and then I can just basically take this out, flip it around 90 degrees, start at 0 again. I don't have to re-zero because in theory everything's the same. Cut to the depth I want, rotate, cut to the depth, rotate, cut to the depth, and then I'm done. And I can choke up quite a bit more because this whole shaft hasn't been machined yet, so it's I can grab it anywhere I want as long as I have enough room for the tool to get to the end where I want to cut it. I bought these nuts thinking I would be putting a the reverse ACME all the way through the vise, and then I could run the bolt through there. I got two of these and screw them on. They didn't really sell half nut ones, so I figured if I wanted to half nut it, I could just take it in the middle and cut it down, or just put two full nuts like this on. But that's out the window because I can't put the full ACME, half-inch ACME through the opening in the back of the vise. So I am going to have to turn it down and pick something else. Okay, so since I can't run the ACME screw all the way through here, I had to make a collar for the smaller diameter. I turned it down. My first plan was to put just a set screw. Of course, that lonely little set screw was going to be resisting all the clamping force of the shaft in there. Of course, that did not work at all. So I had to, the next step is to drill a hole through this and run a pin through it. See if that'll work. All right, so we're gonna find out. I cut this. It's not square to concentric, but whatever, it's going to be fine for this. Slid this on, had to do a little filing on the edges, hand filing just so it would slide on. And now the big test is going to be that hole that I drilled. Let's get it so it's sticking out as far as possible. I'm going to take that hole, which I've drilled through both of these, and put this teeny tiny pin in. I'm not sure if this pin is going to be strong enough to do what it needs to for the vise, but we'll find out. All right, so I tried it at a couple things. I didn't cut too much, actually. You can see that it doesn't go on the round part of the shaft. It goes sort of transition. But more importantly, that teeny 1/16 of an inch pin didn't work. I tried tightening it down and it snapped it. It held it for a little bit, but then, you know, that little extra tightness in the vise. So I will either have to make a new whole thing or replace that pin with a bigger pin. I'm not sure which I'm going to do. All right, since this was ruined otherwise, I went and drilled a bigger hole. It's a 1/8 inch hole. It's probably too big for the shaft, but again, this is just has to work long enough for me to be able to make another one. So I put this through the nail punch to register it, because I didn't necessarily do it exactly by center. So I'm going to screw this set screw, which ended up being handy just for this purpose. And then I'm going to take this expansion pin right here and pound it into that hole. And hopefully, well, that certainly will be strong enough to hold it, I think. All right, so with that new pin in there, which is an 1/8 inch pin, everything seems to work. Now, and then the funny thing is this collar right here, which, like I said, I cut this a little too far, so that's actually tapering. It's not set screwing onto the round part or even the square part, so it's somewhere in between, which is kind of the worst point. But if you remove that, because this is 1/2 inch and this out here is even smaller, even without this collar, this will open because it just pushes against inside there instead of here. So this collar, actually, strictly speaking, is not strictly necessary, because that's just for the opening force. The downward force, it's all on that pin, and it seems to be working. I did notice when I clamp that occasionally the jaws lift up, so I think that's some shims underneath the little doodad there, so I'll probably be taking it apart to remove some shims to make that a little snugger. But finally, in taking it apart and doing all that, underneath this are some shims, and with that little bit of jaw wiggle I had, I ended up taking one layer of shims out of here, and that pretty much cleaned up the slop I had. So it ended up being really, you know, other improvements to the vise in addition to this, just because I was working on it. So here, now the jaw doesn't really want to move at all, at least up and down. And of course it'll still crank, and you can see here I got rid of the collar for now. That means this sticks out a little more, but it works fine. All right, so let's talk about the before and after. So this is the new shaft. I removed it. This is the old one, and you can see the old one's much shorter. So when I built, before I built it, so I had this one, and it had that collar up there, and then it had this collar which rode inside of the thing that went on the end here. Also, you can see here it goes all the way through, but that's part of the problem. These threads they're not true Acme anymore, because they that outside is milled, I guess. So it'll fit through that hole, which is not the right size. This one, and this is, I found out after the fact, it won't go through, so I ended up having to turn this down, and you can see, so I threaded it all the way and then realized that wasn't going to work. So then I cut this part down to fit into that hole over there, but there's still the remnants of the thread. And then I turned it even further down because I didn't like the look of that for putting the collar on. If I had to do it over again, obviously I wouldn't thread all the way, and I'd turn this to the proper diameter there, and then I would probably just keep that not threaded either here and put another collar on like I did here, or have that unthreaded. I believe this is 3/8 inch size, and then over here continue it as 3/8, but maybe even have it a little longer, and then put a 3/8 inch regular thread on there, and I could put two nuts on and jam them on, and then that would be similar to a collar in that it would hold the end on. And then, of course, I started with a 3/4 inch rod that I made this out of because I thought I would put a collar on. I thought I was going to machine a collar not on the inside but on the outside, which I started to, but then I realized because I couldn't get this shaft, like here, that guy, this whole shaft has to fit through right there. And again, same thing, it's too small for the Acme thread. So I had to machine that collar off that I had just spent time doing. And then, of course, you can see here still learning how to use the mill. I knew I was going to have these little shoulders here, and I was fine with that. But as I tried to figure out and get to my dimensions, you can see that it's not concentric and other things went wrong. But it works. And then that retaining collar on the outside that I was left over from the one that was inside, I was just reused the same one. I realized not only did it look bad and it didn't have enough bite to grab here, it actually didn't even need to do the job, because this essentially, since it seats there, it can push against the inside there. So I'm actually going to not have that collar on. Oops. Well, good thing that was the crappy one that I just dropped. Let's see. Anyway, I'm going to drop more things, and then now that I have a working one, I can use the vise to make another one. I'll probably do another one. This one works fine, but I'd like to do another one now that I've learned some things and make it even better.